Thank you for being with us here. Dr. Alistair J. Stewart is the founder and principal of AJS Consulting, where he leverages his intensive experience in the biotech industry to advise companies on strategic growth and development. With a career spanning over 2 decades, Dr. Stewart has worked with a variety of companies, ranging from startups to large-scale biotech firms across diverse therapeutic areas. His expertise lies in guiding innovative projects in biotech, neurotherapeutics, and biologics development, with a particular focus on translating research into commercial success. So before founding AJS Consulting, Dr. Stewart played pivotal roles in both academia and industry, blending scientific rigor with business acumen. He is passionate about fostering the next generation of scientists, entrepreneurs, and frequently collaborating with academic institutions to bridge the gap between research and industry. Today, we're excited to learn more about his journey, gain insights into the biotech industry's future, and hear his advice for neuroscience students interested in entering this rapidly evolving field. So the goal of this interview today is to delve into the rapidly evolving biotech industry, particularly focusing on how neuroscience and neurotechnology are becoming key drivers of innovation. As new therapeutic areas such as gene therapy, biologics, and neurotechnology gain momentum, students and early career professionals must stay informed on the latest industry trends to navigate their entry into the space. Dr. Alistair J. Stewart will share his insights onto these transformative changes, discuss the future directions of neuroscience-based biotech, and offer invaluable advice to students about the skills, experiences, and strategies needed to succeed in this competitive field. So first, we'll kind of talk about career path and industry trends. So you've had an extensive career in the biotech industry, working with companies of various sizes and in diverse therapeutic areas. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey from academia into biotech and what motivated that transition?
Sure. Some of it's kind of straightforward. A lot of it was not that well planned out, if truth be told. But I started off, I grew up in Glasgow in Scotland. I did my undergrad in biochemistry at the University of Glasgow. And then I was looking around for PhD positions that were kind of in line with the areas that I had been interested in at the undergrad level. And I ended up doing a PhD focused on the regulation um, cancer cell proliferation. So at that point, I was not at all involved in neuroscience. My PhD was focused on how hormones regulated gene expression and the proliferation of cancer cells. And so I ended up in the northeast of England at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne. And after completing that, my PhD, I ended up looking around for options in the postdoctoral research areas. And again, I wasn't terribly driven by a specific topic or a specific area of research. I was actually far more driven by location at that point. So
Yeah.
when I started looking around for postdocs, my language skills were very limited, so that kind of cut down the options. I happened to have an uncle who lived outside of Ottawa, and so I went to visit him for a while and scouted out a few labs in the sort of southeast Ontario area. So I visited Toronto, I visited Kingston, Montreal, Ottawa, and ended up getting a postdoc at Queen's University in Kingston, still very much in the cancer field, looking at mechanisms of drug resistance, and stayed there for a couple of years. Got great experience, and along the way, well, at that point, at the end of my first postdoc, I was then looking at what came next, and one of the things about coming out of the UK system is that you're actually a bit younger than equivalent grad students in Canada. So I was quite
Right.
happy to get an extra couple of years postdoctoral experience after my first postdoc. And by that point, I had met my wife, who's Canadian, French Canadian, and over a drink one night, as you do, we thought, oh, it might be fun to do a postdoc in France for a couple of years. So I
Wow.
started applying to postdoctoral labs or labs that had positions open in different parts of France. Ended up getting a position in Orléans, which is just south of Paris. Spent 2 years there, and it was at that point that I started looking at industrial positions. If
Yeah.
truth be told, I was looking for any jobs that moved. And there wasn't an awful lot of strategy at that point. I had And this gets on to a little bit of the kind of research that I was doing at that point as well, because a lot of it was focused on kind of more technical aspects of research, especially in my second postdoc. So we were building tools for drug delivery, and we were building tools that could help therapeutics get to their target by getting them more readily internalized by cells. So that was one of the sort of central themes of the research that I've been doing or for about 4 or 5 years before the end of my second postdoc. And so I wasn't my career path wasn't as well suited to say a full-on academic position where I'd been working on say one specific target for the last 10 years or something. That was not the path that I'd taken at all. So at the end of that second postdoc, I started just looking around for jobs in general. Initially focused on trying to get back to Canada, if truth be told,
Mhm.
but I ended up getting a job, a biotech job in back in the UK, just outside of London. And so that was my first foray into full-on industrial research. It was a smallish biotech company, uh, as I say, based outside of London. I think we were only about 70 people at that point, but big enough. And we did some pretty cool research where you got into the clinic and we were moving ahead. But in the background, on the personal side of things, it was my wife and I were still keen to get back to Canada, so we're still applying for jobs back over here. And I think that my CV just happened to land on the right desk at the right time around about the year 2000, and moved to Vancouver to join a company called QLT, which was doing very well at the time. I was still focused on oncology though at that point, and
Yeah.
was for the next sort of 5-ish years. And then I started to become a bit more of a drug development guy where people were looking for expertise in moving compounds from more sort of research lab-based setting to getting those into formal development where you're moving drugs into the clinic and
Mm.
jumping through all of the hoops that the regulators require in order for you to get that. So that includes pharmacology, toxicology, pharmacokinetics, and that sort of thing. And that's when I started getting out of oncology purely by accident. Just happened to end up getting a job for a year for a gene therapy company working in diabetic research at that point. And after that company, I moved to a company called Alon Therapeutics, was where I started focusing almost exclusively on neuroscience for
Mhm.
probably the next 10 years after that. But I think because of that sort of general background in drug development, which I you know, started to acquire as soon as I got into industry, um, I became suited to working in not just cancer, not just neuroscience, but other disease types as well. So
Yeah.
even since becoming a consultant, I've been working for companies that I've been trying to move forward their compounds or their drug candidates in liver disease or pain. I mean, pain is of course a CNS disease, but sometimes it doesn't seem like it just because of
Right.
the mode of administration. So yeah, that's kind of a long story or convoluted way of saying that my career so far has been, at least in part, location driven, not always very strategic, but just following the opportunities that came up.
Wow. Very inspiring. And I think it really is a testament showing how diverse of an experience you have. I mean, I think part of that drive of wanting to have go to those locations allowed you to try so many different things. And I think maybe in the end that was a great thing, because maybe you weren't focused on one specific thing and you managed to try out so many different sides of this same coin, and be involved in the process in so many different ways. I think that's a pretty incredible story, across different continents, several countries, and many different postdocs and different biotech companies as well. Pretty incredible to
And
hear. Um,
I think one of the things that I think it points to, which is sort of relevant to your readers, is probably the
yeah,
couple of things. One is that by moving between labs, even between grad studies or undergrad and grad studies and postdocs, going between labs and even different countries means that you are getting a whole different set of experiences that you
Yeah.
can carry with you along the way. I think the other thing which I think it highlights is that unlike some other professions, your qualifications are absolutely transferable wherever you
Yeah.
go. It doesn't matter if you're in the UK or North America or mainland Europe.
Yeah.
Your PhD or your your BSc or MSc, that's going to carry with you and be applicable wherever you go.
That's a fantastic point. Yeah, for sure. I think we'll move on to the next question here. So, over the last few years, what are some of the most exciting or transformative trends that you've seen in biotech, particularly in neuroscience or neuroscience therapeutics?
I think it's probably the obvious answer, but it's biologics. I think the ability to target tr- uh, molecules or cell types in a much more precise way. I think we've
Yeah.
still got a long, long way to go on that front, but that's probably the obvious answer there. That antibody therapies and antibody drug conjugates and that sort of thing are really changing the way that we think about what therapeutics are and how good they can be. Previously, obviously, we were using fairly blunt instruments for trying to get a response from people in neuroscience, cancer, and all sorts of areas. But I think that
Yeah.
being able to have those targeted therapeutics is pretty exciting. The other area of which I think is quite maybe a bit more unique to neuroscience is the sort of combination of imaging technologies with drug administration as well. So if you can target the way in which people are responding or the way in which their brain responds in a specific way and target them with sort of tailor-made therapy, I think
Yeah.
that could be quite exciting too. The other one that's I think a little bit more, it's certainly making a difference to many people is thing is totally outside of my domain, but things like the um, transcranial magnetic therapies that you get for
Yeah.
Parkinson's disease, that sort of thing. It's something that for a drug guy like myself, it looks a little bit like science fiction, but it's pretty
Right.
cool. It's definitely working for people.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that stuff is quite interesting. It just shows like in terms of neuroscience, I think there's still so much room for development, and it's pretty exciting what we can all do. I mean, even here at UBC, I know they're working on RNA-based therapies, and we'll see what happens. Like in your opinion, with the increasing interest in neurotechnology, gene therapies, biologics, like you're saying, how do you see the future of this neuroscience-based biotech evolving just in the next decade?
Mm. I think that the biggest hurdle that I hope that we make progress on in the next decade is still the sort of understanding of the disease processes. So I'm thinking about things like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease, where there are more therapies that are available for people now, but there's still a bit of a black box approach in some ways, in that we understand certain parts of Alzheimer's disease, for example. We think we know why the plaques are building up and the tangles are building up. But the fact that many therapies just haven't been as effective as we expected them to be by targeting these pathways, I think it means that we just don't understand enough about the disease yet. So one of the main approaches to try and get around this is to treat patients as early as possible, which I think is definitely one approach. But I think there's got to be still a sort of quantum movement forward to really help us understand those disease processes so that we're not sort of fumbling around so much. So I think that that's still where we've got to make a lot of progress over the next 10 years.
I think that's a fantastic point. Especially with something like Alzheimer's, like we know that these are the symptoms. We're getting these plaques, we're getting these tangles, but I think still a huge amount of work being done and that needs to be done on what's actually going on behind the scenes and targeting therapies for the underlying mechanisms. I think that's a fantastic point. And then in terms of entering the biotech industry, many of our students are eager to explore biotech careers, but they may feel unsure about where to start. So what skills or experiences would you recommend that they focus on to be competitive when they're entering the biotech field?
Mm. I think one of the great things about the system I mean, the university system nowadays compared to, I think, certainly when I was at university a long, long time ago, is the co-op programs and the ability to get out into companies and actually see it firsthand. So I
Yeah,
think that there are definitely some, differences between working in an academic setting versus industrial. I think there's a bit more flexibility on the academic side, not always by any means, but you can maybe follow your nose a bit more.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas on the biotech or industrial side, you're a bit more target driven. You're a bit more focused on a specific task. Um,
yeah.
so some people adapt to one of those options better than the other. But just having some exposure to that on a day-to-day basis, I think, is the best option. To have exposure in an academic lab and to have the ability to see that in a sort of more industrial focus as well. Um, I think in terms of the skill sets, I think I look back at the things that I was doing in my undergrad years, and I think that there's no right or wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
I think anything that you're doing in the lab and all of the research, whether it's paper research or lab-based research, you just never know when it's actually going to come back and help you later on in life. So
Yeah.
it's hard to answer that question specifically, other than to say it's all good. Everything that you're applying yourself to and everything that you're spending time on, it could come back and help you later on in life, just when you're least expecting it.
Well, that's definitely good news for a lot of us because I think so many of us in undergrad were unsure if what we're doing are the right things. But like you said, you never know when that experience will come back and it will help you. And I really like what you said about how the different style, comparing the industry to academia might suit different people better. And I really like your point about using the co-op programs that we have to explore both avenues, because I know a lot of students, just with vicinity and such, it's easy for us to get the research experience, but it might be seem more daunting to get the experience in the industry. So it's definitely a great way to bridge that gap and see what works better for you in terms of the way that you prefer to do that type of work. So I really
Yeah, I
like
think
that.
certainly when I was working at a couple of companies, they had a very active involvement in the co-op program,
Yeah,
and some of the co-op students did great work for us. They were really helpful. Others were a bit more hard work for us to incorporate, but
yeah,
for the people that were more driven and had to get involved, it was great having them on board. But certainly, I when I was younger and in the undergraduate um, program at Glasgow, if
mhm,
truth be told, I didn't have a clue what the options were out there. The career options were pretty opaque to me.
yeah,
So I just kind of followed my nose over the years, and it worked out quite well for me. But I think nowadays, I think that there is a bit more career guidance for undergrads. There's, as I say,
definitely.
the access to co-op programs, and then being able to even just talk to or see what the career path has been for other people in industry. I think should be a help as well for undergrads.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And specifically for those coming from a neuroscience background, what are some roles or areas in the biotech industry that might be kind of particularly aligned with our training and our interests?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure I have a real clear answer to give on that one. I think that a lot of the same principles, that would be relevant to one company outside of neuroscience might be kind of similar. So
Yeah,
even if you can get experience and exposure to companies that are not in the neuroscience space, I think it can still help you in thinking about how you might apply similar principles in neuroscience. So I
totally.
think
Yeah,
I mean, the more I guess the more exposure you have to some of those pathways and the understanding of the brain and how it functions are going to help you more directly in in studying or getting research projects, um, or successfully delivering on research projects in this space. But
yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean that projects outside of that space wouldn't help you as well. So
for sure.
That's a bit of a non-answer for you, Thomas. Sorry.
No, not exactly. I really like your point about how maybe trying something out of your comfort zone. Uh,
Mm.
maybe you can use those principles that you learned somewhere else to come back into neuroscience and make further advancements. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah,
And
certainly when I've been working with co-op students or even grad students, they can be quite focused on going down a bit of a tunnel on certain technologies. So I think it's sometimes good to sort of bring them back out of that rabbit hole, show them the bigger picture again, and sometimes that can bring you outside of the neuroscience space, and I think that can be a good thing.
for sure, no, I definitely agree. And we'll focus on kind of our next transition to our next piece here. And this is going to be about the challenges and the opportunities in biotech. So biotech industry is known for its high risk, high reward nature, especially we've seen that in the last couple of years. So can you share some of the biggest challenges you've faced in your career and how you've navigated them?
Hmm. It's interesting. I remember when I was first getting into my first few biotech jobs, and I was talking to other folks who were in much larger companies, so big pharma, whether it was BMS or GSK or
Yeah,
jobs like that, and we were sort of weighing up the pros and cons of small companies versus big companies, and a lot of the same risks are still there. I'll come back to the comparison between biotech versus academia, but
yeah,
um, when it comes to small companies, there's definitely risks there. They're much more vulnerable when it comes to the funding cycles. They need to get money in. The money, the sort of what do you call it? The runway of money is often very short, and so you can't be really sure that your company's going to last more than 2 to 5 years, say. But at the same time, with a larger company, they also answer to shareholders, and so you can see the ups and downs even of the multinational companies and the waves of layoffs there. So I don't feel like the job security has really been that much worse at smaller companies in my experience than
yeah.
larger companies. Yes, you have to take a bit of a risk sometimes in making that leap and going with the smaller companies, but certainly in my experience, um, the job duration hasn't been that much worse than many of my colleagues that I've worked with in larger companies.
Mm,
So I think that's one thing to be said there. I think when it comes to the comparisons, even with academia, I've got many friends who are in academia, and there's a whole different set of challenges there when it comes to job security and
yeah,
tenureship, et cetera, et cetera. So
definitely.
there's never any guarantee there. I think the high risk versus high reward, yeah, I think that's probably true. I think that when I look back on the successes, you kind of gauge your success in a different way, perhaps when you're with smaller companies, where you take the wins where you can get them, and maybe
Right.
that's getting into clinic, getting into a certain stage of clinical development. Whereas
Yeah.
in a larger company, you might judge that a little bit differently. But no, I think there's definitely there's fun to be had in either the big company setting or the smaller company setting. Is just a different set of experiences. I think the last thing I would say on that is that I think that when you're working for smaller companies, yes, there might be a bit more of a risk of the longevity of the company, but at the same time, you're also getting exposed to many different parts of the business which you
Right.
might not get in a larger company where you might be a bit more pigeonholed. So I think that getting
Totally.
that experience sets you up well for future employment too.
Yeah, it seems like maybe having a role in a smaller company, you can have a little bit more freedom with what you're doing, it seems. But I
Mhm.
think whether it's small companies or big companies, biotech is a space where innovation happens rapidly. And I just wanted to get some advice on how you think students can kind of remain adaptable and keep up with all the fast-paced changes in the industry.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, obviously, read and read and read. There's
Yeah,
always there's never any shortage of things to read. I think
yeah,
in terms of getting out there and networking as well, that can
yeah,
often be quite advantageous. I know that in Vancouver there are a couple of um, I don't know if they're still around, but there certainly used to be a student biotechnology network.
yeah,
Um, they used to host some pretty interesting events where they would have speakers along from biotech companies. So I think that's a nice setting.
Yeah.
There's the odd. I volunteer with a group called the PBSS, which is Pharmaceutical Bioscience Society, and they also host seminars and webinars as well. They do give student rates for attending their meetings as well. So
Yeah.
that's another way to sort of get out there, hear what's going on, hear what's new,
Yeah.
and also an opportunity to meet people in industry. So I think
Cool.
these are good examples of
Yeah.
options that are out there.
Yeah.
And I certainly feel like most people are going to be quite happy to speak to students and give them input where they can and help
Yeah.
out wherever possible too.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Just getting involved, it can seem daunting in the first place, but kind of once you get the ball rolling, you start making more and more connections, and it can feel a lot easier at that point. And kind of going along with that, we'll kind of look at some future directions and advice. Um, so just in your experience, like what excites you the most about the current landscape in biotech? And are there any specific areas of innovation or research that you think neuroscience students should pay close attention to?
Wow, it's a huge question. It's tough. I think that
Yeah,
what excites me is just the flexibility of thinking that folks have. I look,
yeah,
specifically around the Vancouver area where, when it comes to biotech companies, including neuroscience ones, there's still
yeah,
always ups and downs. There's companies that come and go, but there's always the sort of there's the brain power that sort of sticks around Vancouver. Um, and is finding innovative ways to fundraise, innovative ways to set up the companies and bring their smart ideas forward. They might
yeah,
not be smart enough to, still be there 15 years down the line, but there's
yeah.
always good ideas coming out of the woodwork, and that's really sort of supporting the infrastructure and the sort of system of biotechnology in the area here. For specific technologies, I don't know. I don't have a great answer on that one. I do think I go back a bit to the sort of imaging aspects of neuroscience, and I think that that's only going to become more and more important as we move forward. Just having that sort
Totally.
of non-invasive ability to look at the brain.
Yeah.
The difficulty, of course, is the complexity, and that's where I start to glaze over a bit. And the machine learning has to come in, the AI has to come in, and help out in the interpretation of such an overwhelming amount of data.
I think that's a really key point. I mean, you're totally right. Like, I agree that all the imaging prospects are huge. That's going to be very important for the upcoming therapies. But you're right. It's going to be pretty multi-disciplinary. We're going to have physicists working on these MRI machines. We need exactly computer scientists doing the machine learning algorithm. I think us scientists can only do so much, and we'll need to work together with other people as well. But I really agree. I think that will be huge coming up in the next decade. And kind of going along with that, we'll look into the past. And if you were entering the biotech field today, knowing what you do now, what would you do differently, if anything? And kind of what advice would you give to your younger self?
Wow. I think that I've been lucky. There's not a ton of things I would change in terms of my career. I think that the sort of theme that I mentioned to you earlier around location, it means
Yeah,
that if you're if you're going by location, you've got to be pretty flexible in terms of how you, or what the skill sets that you have if you want to say stick around Vancouver or go, moving up to a particular place.
yeah,
Um, I think that if I had wanted to take a somewhat different path, I would have probably focused down on specific pathways or a specific part of the sort of academic research projects that I'd been working on,
yeah,
rather than becoming more sort of generalist in my approach. I think
Mhm.
being able to focus down on specific areas that would have been different. It might have been fun in a different way. I've had lots of
Right.
fun
Yeah.
the way I've gone, but it would have been interesting to become more of a sort of subject area expert rather than
Right.
covering being a bit of a jack of all trades, which is what I've become.
Well, who knows? I mean, everything happens for a reason. So maybe this is what you were meant to do, and it wouldn't have worked out the way it did if it wasn't the case. But thank you so much, Dr. Stewart, for sharing your valuable insights with us today. It's clear that the biotech industry is full of exciting opportunities and innovative advancements, particularly for those of us with neuroscience backgrounds. So your advice on navigating the transition from academia to industry, keeping pace with the rapid changes in the field. I'm sure all of your advice will help a lot of our listeners as they consider their own paths forward. And on behalf of the UBC undergraduate program in neuroscience and the Brain Blast newsletter, we truly appreciate your time and expertise. We look forward to staying connected and potentially working with you in the future as our students explore the field of biotech.
You bet. You're very welcome. That was a good fun.